When you look at kind of the history of the profession and you look at particularly kind of things like the way that issues of kind of race and class and gender are talked about in architecture journals, and you look back 20 years and it's the same kind of conversations that are going on, and in some ways it doesn't feel like enough has changed. And so I think that gets quite frustrating then, because it's kind of like, oh well, what can we do and how can we kind of imagine something better? Yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, your job role, etc.?
My name is Anna Ifanti. I am an associate at CZWG Architects.
I'm Alison Gravett. I'm the Planning Conditions Officer at Dover District Council.
I'm Helen Piggott and I'm a coastal infrastructure engineer for the Royal National Lifeboats Institution.
My name's Nkechi Vivian Ashiedu and I'm a design coordinator.
I'm Libby. I am a project architect at Hassel. So we are a multidisciplinary practice. I've been chartered for 8 years now, and I've been at Hassel for just over 3 years.
My name is Dr. Anna Wakeford Holder, and I'm a lecturer at the University for Creative Arts. I teach history and theory across all of the different courses, and then I do that part-time, and part of the time I work in practice for a small practice called Good Architecture in London, and I also work with a social enterprise architecture practice in Sheffield as well on occasion.
My name is Eloise Mitchell and I'm at the moment I'm a trainee planner, hopefully soon becoming a planning officer.
I'm Amrit Sira and I work at Studio Partington. I'm a Part 2 architectural assistant. I've been at Studio Partington since August.
My name's Katie Willen. I've been teaching for about 5 years. I teach digital media. I'm a digital media technical tutor.
My name is Jacqueline. I'm an urban designer, a placemaker, master planner, workshop facilitator, speaker, co-author, creative, registered and chartered architect, and I'm the founding director of Global Urban Design, which is a social enterprise.
My name is Danielle McIntyre. I work for GRT Architecture. My role is a senior architectural technologist. My main role is detailing, construction detailing for developments, mainly apartment blocks.
My name is Christina Xie. I'm originally from Taiwan. I'm a structural engineer. I have been a structural engineer since 2003, and I just started my own company 2 years ago, doing structural engineer consultancy.
My name is Kathy Miller. My job role is architectural designer. I basically do building like stage 3 to completion.
I'm Sarah Akibogan and I'm an architect and filmmaker, and I run a small practice. 2 practices really, so one is an architecture and art practice, and then the other is an installation and performance practice called Appropriate.
Krista Evans, I'm senior architect at CZWG. I have been since Christmas, but I've been qualified for 4 years, I think, 4.5 years.
My name is Angie Pandoria. I'm a project surveyor for a family-run carpentry and joinery subcontractor called Abbey Contracts. I've grown up with the firm 6 years ago when I started in the industry as a trainee, and I've worked my way up to become a project surveyor.
I'm Emma Flanagan. I work at PH Plus Architects. I'm a director. I've been a director now for 9 months, but prior to that I was an associate, and prior to PH Plus, which I've been at 5.5 years now. I was at Grimshaw Architects for 5 years, working on large-scale infrastructure projects.
My name's Andrea Risvold. I'm an architect and I've been working for GRT for 1.5 years. Mainly work on the planning side, but getting involved in a bit of everything.
Why did you choose this career path? Tell us a bit about your background and the journey that led you to your current position.
So my entry into construction is very far from conventional. So my dad is a carpenter and he worked his way up to then become a director of a company. So when we were young, me and my siblings used to sit around on a Sunday evening and help him in the kitchen doing takeoffs. So we'd all grab highlighters and we'd have the A1 drawings out and we'd be doing manual takeoffs with him. And it was from there, I guess, that my knowledge of construction kind of grew, and the excitement of it, you know, the drawings and everything kind of grew. So I was interested in construction, but because of my appearance and who I was, it wasn't seen as a conventional profession for, especially an Asian lady. So I followed school protocols. You know, I was telling the school, oh no, I really want to go into an apprenticeship route or start working, but it was a no, everyone's doing UCAS, you must do your application, you have to go to uni. So it became a mandatory thing, and I did my application, went to Brunel for 2 weeks, sitting in the auditorium doing accounting and finance, and I looked at the back and I was like, I am just another number amongst 100. I told my parents I wasn't happy, and then the rest is history. Joined my dad and my uncle in the family firm, and I never looked back.
So architecture for me was kind of the perfect fit of what I liked doing at school. So I was very into maths, physics, art, technology, and I kind of did the traditional year 10 work experience. A week at a law firm, a week in an architecture practice, and there was kind of no comparison for me. So that kind of led me to think maybe architecture was the way to go, because I thought carpentry, which was my dream profession, maybe was a bit more limited, and architecture just carpentry but on a massive scale. I knew I wanted to be an architect probably 15, 16, so tailored my A-levels to that. I went to university in Newcastle, but I did my whole 5th year on exchange at the University of Adelaide. So I wanted to go and experience design in a different climate, a different location, different culture. So I went for that full year, heard about Hassell when I was out there, as they're one of the biggest firms in Australia. But I'd already been working in London for my Part 1, so I returned there once I'd qualified. I was there for about 10.5 years in total, and then Hassell themselves branched out from being a mainly Australian and Asian firm, moved over to London, and I thought, right, this is a great chance to kind of get involved in a really creative global firm. So I jumped over when they'd been here about 2 years.
When I was in high school, I loved to watch documentaries, and I find there was one series in Discovery and with a structural engineer talk about how he built the Sydney Opera House. So when I was watching this documentary, I just this sounds like a very interesting job, and I hope one day I will be working for the same company and also to build an iconic project like him. I finished my university degree in Taiwan, and then I came here to do a master degree. And the reason I came here to do a master degree, it was actually a lot based on because I'm a woman. Because I didn't know that as a woman it's very hard to be an engineer in Taiwan. So I saw that if I come here to do a master degree, maybe it will help me to promote my career, and then I can go back to be an engineer again.
I came into the industry in a really sort of strange way. I came out of college with A-levels in psychology, sociology, philosophy and biology.
Wow.
So nothing to do with engineering or architecture or construction at all. I didn't want to do anything with any of that, so I started looking for a job and got a job as a secretary at an architect's firm. I think I lasted about 3 months before they started training me up to do graphic design work and CAD technician work and things like that. So I did that for a couple of years, and then 2007 the recession hit, so they went bust and I got made redundant. So I started up my own firm doing CAD technician work and graphic design, and so 3D modelling, planning applications, building regulations, things like that. And then the nature of working for yourself, it's either full on or nothing. On one of the nothing days I decided to apply to university and looked for anything related to do with building at all, and applied for 2 civil engineering ones, 2 architecture ones and a construction management one, and got accepted on the civil engineering ones, so there I went.
I worked for a few years. I worked for Allsop Architects, I worked at Foster & Partners, and then so I talked about wanting to do something that was very much worked with people, and I think I got to a point in my career when, you know, part of architecture is very much about sitting in front of a computer, producing drawings, and at that time I think I felt that I wasn't it felt quite detached from some of the initial ambitions and aspirations I'd had. So I suppose I started to kind of meander mentally, did lots of kind of part-time courses on the side, very much kind of inspired by some people I'd met during my time in theatre who did site-specific work, and there I saw an overlap between architecture and a potential overlap between architecture and performance. So I was lucky enough to get a place on an MA at Central St Martin's. I spent a year doing a master's in acting, and then I came back to architecture and sort of have tried with my own practice to bring all of those things together. And somewhere in there is the filmmaking as well.
Do you feel that your gender has impacted on your experience?
I don't think men are even conscious of how much of a man's field it really is. They're so used to dealing with themselves that sometimes you'll sit at a meeting, you'll say something, and then they'll carry on the conversation as if they spoke about this. It's like you're invisible sometimes.
Particularly out on site, people are quite resistant to females being on site. They're quite, some are brilliant, don't get me wrong, but some can be a little bit more, they feel like they need to watch themselves all the time with what they're doing on site. They think that they have to behave differently, to a certain extent they do, so that's fine by me.
Well, in UK, I get more opportunities as a woman, but there are difficulties, like there are quite a lot of time when I go on site, the contractor, the first things would look at me and say, oh, how old are you? Are you married? Are you chartered? Do you actually have experience? And just this kind of things is happening so quite a lot in the construction field. And also like the builders on site, when I try to take photos of my structure, the builder never take me seriously. They just come and then come into the photo, think I was just like a tourist.
In some ways, definitely. I think it's varied depending on which practice I've worked at. So I think the one it has the most is when I went for a much larger commercial practice, and I did feel like sometimes I was treated in a more junior way than I was qualified to be. And in other practices, the more smaller creative practices in my situation, there's been lots of women and lots of consultants that were also female.
There is a lot of change in the culture nowadays, but when I first started, and in my first role as a project architect in London, things were a little bit different at the time. So I found myself being a young female foreign architect needing to be in charge of a project, run meetings, delegate tasks, and it was literally a room full of suited men. So there was always this need to prove my ability and to prove my skills and to hold my voice and to not be intimidated by it all.
Gender has definitely impacted on my experience, but it's not a yes or a no, it's a yes and a no.
I don't think so, not negatively anyway. I think actually in our office, in both offices that I've worked, there's mainly women, to be honest, which is, I wasn't expecting that when I was moving in. I just thought it would be loads of men, you know, deciding all these things and shaking hands with people and kind of doing dodgy deals, but it's definitely not like that at all.
There is a slightly odd feeling when you're kind of in a room with about 15 middle-aged men in suits that are in their 40s or 50s, and you're obviously a lot younger and not a man, and you're just like, come on.
Yes and no. So for the yes, I think the impact has been that wherever I've worked, I've been the only females most places. I try not to allow that to bother me over the years, so I'm used to it now. Even when I'm working now, I'm the only female at my level. I felt the impact was more when I had children. I had them earlier on into my career. I didn't understand why most females had children at a later on in life or at a senior level until I had my kids. And then I realized, oh, that's why you shouldn't have kids so early on. But luckily for me, I have a good family network. So they really supported me on the late hours at work, early hours at work, time away.
if it's like me children. I mean, I was scared really to come back, and I'd lost a lot of confidence in those years out, so I think it could put people off. It's not always the easiest career to go into when you've got children.
In architecture and built environment, it's 80% white male. In the digital area of design, it's 85% white male. In the product and industrial design area, it's 95% white male. So bearing that in mind, it's really unusual to see women in the design field in the context of the UK. It's even more unusual to see women who are black or from other ethnic backgrounds. And even though women make up 50% of the population, and across all three of those sectors, the students studying who are female make up 63%, you have those numbers in the working world. So that speaks to real barriers for women completing those studies and entering the industry for women. And those women who do complete also earn less than their white male counterparts.
I definitely felt like at certain points in my education, like gender was quite a big deal. I felt in undergraduate particularly like maybe the female students weren't always kind of treated in the same way as the male students, and also kind of, I guess, in terms of feeling like represented in the industry, like among the kind of tutors there, and then among the people that were being kind of held up as role models and things like that. And when I went into practice, I think it was a bit more mixed, but again, a lot of my bosses were men, but they were always like really supportive, and actually I had a really good experience going into industry. But yeah, I think just that thing of like not necessarily being able to see the people who were like what I wanted to be.
I think for me it hasn't particularly. I think specifically where I am now, it's just about the right person for the job. We're a really great team. I think what I did lack whilst at diploma and then in some of my first placements was female support. So it was hard to find a female figure high up to respect and look up to. There weren't very many, and I think that balance is really being looked at now and is, hot on the agenda, and things are starting to change quite rapidly, which is really, really positive to see, and there are more people to look up to, more people to share experiences with.
But the only difference I'd say where you still feel a bit underrepresented is when you get to senior positions. So I'd say just from the backlog of there not being enough women coming through, at the kind of partner director level, there's still not really that representation.
There are kind of well-documented inequalities, gender inequalities. We know about this. We know about the gender pay gap. We know that there are very few women at the top of large practices and so on. And then there are obviously the kind of the daily interactions in an office, kind of office culture, kind of little instances of let's say difficult interactions, maybe even bullying. We know that this happens and that women are probably disproportionately affected by that. I think for me, the bigger issue, or at least equal issue, has probably been that of race. These two things definitely interact and overlap. So in terms of race, I think it's complex. There's no kind of single thing. It's not about open discrimination. It's about the kind of the small things like maybe the lack of networks that we have because there are few people from ethnic minorities at sort of top positions in practice and so on. And I think it's also just the social thing of having people to share your experiences with, on a difficult day, people that you identify with, people that might also choose to mentor you in practice.
I think now, kind of having looked at kind of bigger picture stuff, particularly with my students, and kind of looking at that sort of, I guess, intersection of gender and race and class, it's kind of like recognising that it's a much kind of more complicated issue. So it's not so much just about gender. I think it's kind of also about seeing how those kind of different things kind of cross over and what the kind of, either what the limitations are because of people's prejudices, or also just the kind of paths that happen because people hire people that are like them.
What's really exciting about now is that there are lots of kind of diversity groups springing up. There's obviously Black females in architecture. I am part of Women in Architecture. I'm vice chair of Women in Architecture, which I forgot to mention. But so, you know, there's lots happening. People are building their own networks, and that's really exciting.
Negatively and positively, but I think without both of those aspects, I wouldn't be the person I am today in this industry, and definitely where I am in this industry.
It's definitely more of a challenge. It's a more male orientated industry. But I think if you're strong enough and you've got a strong voice, I think, you know, it's not a problem. You have to be a very strong woman.
Tell us something you're proud of or an achievement at work.
I'd definitely say a proud achievement was finishing my first project and seeing it get constructed. There's no feeling quite like that. It was just a small school extension, but to know that I went through conception to planning to building control, and then went on site to, and I just missed the handover, so seeing it being in use. But to know that you've designed something, created something, and it's built, it's standing, and there's people that are benefiting from that is really, really a proud.
I've had quite a lot of moments that I can say I've been proud of, but for me it's not the awards, recognition, things like that that make me proud. It's making my dad and my uncle proud, making my family proud that I'm a non-conventional person to an industry, but I'm still being respected and treated as an equal.
I think the one thing that stands out is my first job for CZWG Architects, which was to run the team for a public library in London, Canada Water Library, which took about 4 to 5 years from planning to completion. It was an incredibly interesting scheme. My role in it had many facets, so I had to be the lead consultant, project architect, but also contract administrator and project manager, construction project manager. So it was particularly intimidating at first, huge learning curve. I learned through a lot of people in many roles as part of that project, and I managed to complete it and hand it over about a month before I had my son. So it was all sort of coming together at the same time. So to me, it's a very, very special project. It was a huge challenge that turned out to be a great achievement. It won numerous awards, and I guess I see it as a little bit like my baby as well. So
I've been really working towards making cohesive materials, stuff that is on brand, because that makes sense to me. It's a UCA brand, and so I've kind of made all of my materials, you know, digital and printed, and I think my managers have seen that recently and gone, oh, this is really nice, and they've started to sort of look at rolling that out across all 4 campuses, which is really good.
What do you think the industry would look like if there were no men?
Ooh, I mean, the construction industry with no men, I don't think there'd be much of an industry.
I love this question.
It's such a hard question. I was thinking that, and then I was kind of thinking, oh, it's kind of a failure of my imagination, because I really can't imagine that.
Wow, okay. I mean, we cannot obliterate men from the industry.
This is an interesting question.
Ooh, that's a challenging one.
Ooh, that's a provocative question.
Ooh. Nice and pretty and floral.
I think there might be a little bit more listening and less talking if there were more females in the industry. There is a very strong sense of support and sisterhood amongst women, which I think the industry would benefit from. So I think there might be less strive to sort of less alpha male testosterone kind of attitude, and more empathy and more support and promotion and helping each other, I suppose. So I wouldn't want to see our industry being focused on one gender, but I would like to see a lot more parity, and I think women have an awful lot to contribute on many levels, from an academic education level to holding key positions in the industry that were traditionally predominantly male held.
So I feel like it would just be a lot more logical and practical. I feel like we pay each other equally, which is definitely a big thing.
There's a place for everybody in the workplace. I think harmoniously, if everybody just respects one another and just gets on with the job in hand.
I think it'd actually probably be quite a sad industry with no men. It'd be quite empty. But also I think it wouldn't be right. So just if there weren't women, it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right if there weren't men, because architecture and construction is all about creating places for people, right? And men are people, everybody, no matter what gender or background you are. I think you need to have people designing that can identify or relate to everyone, to design places for everyone.
Empty. I think it'd be empty, but it'd also be sad. Just the same way it's sad that there isn't any females, people with disabilities, people from BAME backgrounds. The same way we have those issues, it would be the same as if there weren't any men. I mean, you look at other industries where it's female dominated and we think, oh, why aren't there any men? And so I think without any individual of a certain characteristic, it's always going to be empty.
I think the industry would be very sad. It would be as shameful and as counterproductive and as economically damaging as not having more women and more ethnically diverse designers and differently able designers in the industry today. So it's really about shining a spotlight on the damage caused to the design industry by not being gender and ethnic and cultural and ability inclusive.
I think it's interesting how kind of like how much the kind of way that things are at the moment like shapes your view, even when you're trying to kind of critique them and imagine alternatives, because just thinking like what would that look like becomes really impossible. I think definitely moving into academia from being in practice, it's really nice to kind of be in rooms, be in work situations where you don't feel like you're the only woman, where you don't feel like you're having to represent as a woman, or you don't feel like you're being kind of talked down to. But having said that, I think there is definitely, from when I started kind of working in practice when I first graduated, it feels like things are getting better, and I don't know whether that's also just a bit getting older and people kind of like, I think age kind of plays a part in it as well.
It's almost, the question is almost like saying what would the planet be without human beings? I think the main focus for me is how do we increase women in the industry itself. According to, is it Randstad? I read that by 2020 in the UK construction workforce there'll be 26% women. So it's how do we increase that to 50% and making it a level playing field?
I don't think it would be better.
No.
It would be very different, but I don't think it would be better. I think the only way to improve it is to have a better balance between the two, because I'm a firm believer that it's not about your gender, it's about your personality as a human being. And we are brought up in different ways. There are different impacting factors on you as a child growing up that mean that men and women have very different experiences. So until society changes as a whole, you're not going to get that balance without having a balance of genders in the workplace. So
I think it's not about gender for this one. I think it's about a balance of diversity, debate, and just finding different characters that balance out ideas, push off each other, and get the best out of design and industry and make a difference. So for me, I think it's got to be all in, everybody, and a diverse mix as possible that we can create.
I think it's not about there being an industry without men. It's about there being an industry that is diverse and reflects the society that it serves.
What advice would you have for anyone thinking about joining the industry?
don't be intimidated by stereotypes and by ideas you may have about what you can or you cannot achieve, because we can do anything we put our minds on.
Push for yourself. First of all, push for yourself, for your own career and your own autonomy, because it matters to you. It doesn't really matter to anyone else, and even other women probably aren't going to stop and help you unless you push for it, like a guy would push for it. A guy would help, ask for that help.
Develop a tough skin, because it's a very critical industry. There's a lot of criticism, but you've got to turn that criticism into constructive criticism.
It's definitely not laying bricks, you're not, the construction industry isn't just being a brickie and actually building houses. There's so much that goes into it before things are actually, built from the ground.
I think it's a fantastic industry. The thing that I think really sets it apart that probably not a lot of people realise, and this goes down to disciplines within the industry as well, is the variety. So you might qualify as an architect, you might work at it for 2 or 3 years, you could work at a big global practice like this, you could work at a one-man band, you could work at a small practice. Each would have very different experiences. And then from that as well, you might decide, oh, actually, I've had a really great time working with a branding consultant or one of your sub-consultants or subcontractors on a job, and you could then vary and go off into any of those sectors as well. So for me, it's an industry that has so many tiers and ways to go within it that you could stay within that industry but do something very different every year of your career, probably.
Master your craft to the point where it's impossible for anyone to not pay attention to you. That's the key thing. Learn everything possible, grab every experience possible, and take it with your full hand. Take responsibility of that, and I think that's the main thing. And you will go far.
I'd like to encourage people to kind of help to kind of push for change and kind of make the industry more like they want it to be, rather than feeling like it's it's not for them because they don't immediately fit into it.
Don't take what people say for granted. It's always do what you think is right for you, and be confident in yourself.
You can be anything you want to be within construction.
Don't let anything stop you.
I'd say go for it.
Collaboration is essential, and it's amazing. It's literally what makes us better.
Making deliberate decisions to avoid sexism, to avoid racism, to avoid discrimination on whatever grounds. Those things just are not acceptable. And as a society, we should not be tolerating the status quo, as it were, and really be making inroads to change things.